Hello everyone, and welcome to this ODI event on gendering the green city in an era of climate breakdown. I'm Joseph Fahrentalk, a research fellow in our climate sustainability team at ODI. I'm really excited by today's fantastic panel of speakers, and we are delighted to host this event for CSW 66. Before I introduce our speakers, just a bit of housekeeping. We'd really like to encourage plenty of exchange between our wonderful audience and invited speakers. So please think now about what you might like to ask our guests and use the Q&A function chat box below this live stream to send in your questions, and I'll come to them later in the session. Now let me introduce our guests, and having worked on women's land rights and climate across Africa and Southeast Asia for many years, I can testify that this is an exceptional panel, and I look forward to a rich discussion. We are extremely fortunate to have Honourable Elizabeth Saki, the Mayor of Accra and former member of Ghana's Parliament, joining us. Elizabeth is a close friend of ours through her role in the Africa-Europe Mayors Dialogue, which is convened by ODI. We will also hear from Dr. Chandni Singh, a senior research consultant with the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, and most recently coordinating lead author of the Asia chapter of the IPCC Working Group 2's report, which was just published last month. So she's been extremely busy recently, and we're extremely thankful that she's made the time to attend this session. You'll have all seen the headlines in the latest climate science. Finally, we are lucky.
Problem with the network to everyone.
So I'm just getting a bit of background. But finally, we are lucky to be welcoming Sarah Nandudu, who's joining us from Jinja in Uganda. Sarah is the Vice Chairperson of the National Slum Dweller Federation of Uganda and Deputy Chair of the Board of Shack and Slum Dwellers International. We are very proud to work with SDI under the auspices of the African Cities Research Consortium, which ODI is a partner of. Before we start, I just wanted to cover some of the three basic concepts that underpin the title of this webinar and which will help frame the conversation on gendering the green city in an era of climate breakdown. The first is the idea of a green city. So green cities are also referred to as climate smart, sustainable, low carbon or zero carbon cities. Fundamentally, a green city is measured by environmental indicators such as emissions per person, or the amount and quality of green space. But importantly, green cities can be places where people are healthier and more productive, and where low carbon measures are used to make them more compact, connected, and clean. Well-connected and electrified mass transit systems would offer convenient and comfortable commutes, reducing the need to drive. The few vehicles on the streets could be electric, quiet, and pollution-free, allowing for cleaner air and making asthma, allergies, and other respiratory diseases far less common. Neighborhoods could be planned to encourage safe walking and cycling, enabling local retailers and eateries to thrive from steady foot traffic. And homes and commercial buildings could be constructed to allow for increased natural lighting, good ventilation, and material design choices that limit the need for temperature control. Combined with rooftop solar panels and highly efficient heating and cooling systems, compact, connected, and clean cities would sharply reduce costs for households and businesses. Greening cities therefore offer opportunities to eradicate poverty and to improve living standards for all urban residents, but realizing this opportunity will depend on participatory processes and equitable outcomes to ensure that no one is left behind. And that is a critical challenge we will consider today. That brings me to my second definition of what it means to gender a green city. Now, there are obviously several frameworks that can be used to analyze gender equality. We could just look at it simply in terms of men's and women's access and control over resources. And that's just not material resources such as housing or land, but human and social resources as well, such as education, family, and friends. Even where access and control over resources is gender equal, decision-making power over what to use those resources for is often constrained, and that's especially the case for women. To ensure that women are able to access all opportunities that a green city offers, they need to have agency. And women and other marginalized groups should be free from traditional responsibilities around the division of labor within the household in order to access formal employment and education opportunities. Women also need to feel safe walking from home or taking public transport, and encouraged to enter green growth sectors such as transportation or construction that traditionally fall under the purview of men. I assume that we'll be hearing a lot more about the critical issue of tackling discriminatory norms and attitudes in our discussions today. And finally, we need to think about these two concepts, gendering and greening cities, within the context of an increasingly hostile environment caused by the effects of climate change. Global warming is threatening cities through an increase in extreme weather events, such as flooding, storms, and heat waves, as well as long-term stresses, such as food and water scarcity or rising sea levels. And women and other marginalized groups are often more vulnerable to these effects due to their lack of resources, for instance, by living on land that is prone to flooding or landslides. And it is vital to support those most vulnerable in building resilience to climate change, and gendering green cities offers an opportunity to do so, while also tackling and mitigating the causes of climate change. I also would really appreciate, from a personal perspective, to move away from looking at women as vulnerable actors to those that can actually act as agents in tackling climate change in part of today's discussion. Now, I'm sure that you're all very keen to hear from the panelists rather than me, so let me stop there and open the panel to our first question. It is my great pleasure to welcome an ODI friend, Mayor of Accra, Mayor Saki, to this panel today. We'd very much like to start this conversation by coming to you first to ask you if you could share with us your vision for integrating gender into Accra's Greening City initiatives. Mayor Saki, over to you. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very happy to be here today. In fact, being a woman and being the city leader at the forefront of the climate action agenda, I am a representative of women at the decision-making level, and that makes it my mission to ensure that gender is incorporated into the Accra greening agenda. Therefore, I intend to ensure that more women, and I mean more women, have access to green job opportunities, that all the Green Accra projects will have women represented there, that women are included in stakeholder engagement on climate action, particularly on the greening agenda. This is to empower them and build their capacity on greening the city of Accra.
Thank you, Mayor Saki. And what are some examples of how this can be done, and what are the main blockages to implementing this agenda?
Thank you so much. I think in the first of it is in our waste management efforts. I intend to encourage and train more women as informal waste workers. The Accra Metropolitan Assembly is packaging a program to promote the separation of waste at the household level, whereby families divide waste into biodegradable and non-biodegradables. The waste collectors will go from house to house and then to collect it and then sell what can be sold. What cannot be reused will be sent for recycling, which will in turn create more job opportunities. This will have both economic and environmental benefit as well.
Thank you
We
very
will,
Thank you very
okay.
much, Mayor Saki.
What- Can I continue or that's enough for you?
No, no, no. Please continue. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, okay. I will work with relevant stakeholders to conduct skill needs analysis to establish skill requirements by men and women to equally participate and benefit from opportunities created in the green job sectors. The information will be used to create targeted green skills development and training initiative for men and women. So I say men and women because the men also are important as well in such projects. But my focus will also be on the women. Then I also think that I will want to work or intend to work with the Ministry of Employment and Labor and the Children and Gender Ministry to ensure employment and skill development policies that are developed for green job sector and gender responsive and support by all relevant stakeholders. I also intend to include more women in the tree planting exercises rolled out. We've started with street planting of trees, and we are calling it tree planting exercise. And since we have started and it has been rolled out, it will also help in ongoing the that is not only to enhance the environment but will also affect lives and positively promote clean air among others. So that's another area that I intend to do. I also believe strongly that if we can do this, it will ensure access to funds from all stakeholders. Examples are the government, education institutions, project donors, private investors, and prioritize programs that train women for non-traditional positions, which will enable them to make a transition into more dominated occupations in the green economy. And then investing in women and girls will not only enhance gender equality, access gender equality, but then there will also be access to green and decent jobs, but will also promote cleaner and more equitable development. And I strongly also believe in engaging women at all levels of employment and drive the green of our greening of our city agenda. When talking of women, I'm looking at the women architects, waste collectors, gardeners, and then even the market women. Production companies as such and workers among others will be engaged in their contributions as well as their buy-in sought. So this and many other things I have intended to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mayor Saki, for those really insightful examples. And I like the way that you also talk about men and women. It's about gender equality, and we all know that in some settings it can go the other way, although more commonly women are the ones that are disadvantaged. But thank you very much for sharing your vision with us. I would like to turn to Dr. Chandni Singh next, who is lead researcher on these issues and is really well placed to tell us what the evidence shows in terms of gender transformative approaches to greening the city. So, Chandni, thanks for being here today. I'd like to start by diving straight in and asking you, how can the Green City Agenda be an opportunity for gender transformative policy and planning approaches to urban problems in our current era of climate breakdown?
Thank you so much, Joseph. And it's really an honor to go after Miyazaki. So, and just listen to such a phenomenal female leader. So, thank you so much. All right, coming straight to your question, I guess we do know that climate action and urban sustainability initiatives are increasing quite a bit all across the world, and at least especially in the global south where I am based in India, we see a lot of action around climate adaptation and urban sustainability. And we also know, I mean, there's so much conversation about some of these interventions really providing opportunities to address underlying vulnerabilities in cities, whether these vulnerabilities are because of certain people being in certain livelihoods or belonging to certain age groups, or of course belonging to certain genders. However, what we've seen often is that there's less emphasis on what happens from these solutions after they take place, and are they really increasing or redistributing vulnerability rather than addressing it. And this, at least in the recent IPCC report, we call these negative consequences or unintended negative consequences of certain solutions. We call them maladaptation. So just to give you a flavor of some of what these look like, and then what are the implications really for women living in cities. We had recently done an assessment, a global assessment of climate change adaptation interventions in cities, and try to understand whether these actions are helping or hindering gender equality. And the way we did this is we looked at the targets and the indicators that we have on SDG 5, which is the SDG on gender equality. And unfortunately, the first thing we found is that there's very little out there on this topic. So while we do have a lot of work on gendered vulnerability in cities, there's not as much looking at how adaptation actions and sustainability solutions are really leading to gendered outcomes. So we focus on the problem, but not so much on the outcomes of the solutions we are implementing. So when we do measure success of an adaptation strategy, like our monitoring and evaluation systems just aren't there around whether we are alleviating or addressing some of these gendered vulnerabilities. So I think that's one of the key takeaways of that work, where we found that urban adaptation projects and studies really tend to focus inordinately on women's differential vulnerability to climate risks, but very less evidence on actually the fact that there are gendered outcomes of these adaptation actions. The second thing that we did find in this work was that there are, of course, several adaptation actions that improve women's agency. One of the examples I can give is around urban agriculture, so farming in cities, which can have benefits for livability, for subjective well-being. So that's quality of life, and then also things like incomes and nutrition. And often women are the ones who are doing these kinds of things. So there are positive outcomes of these. However, we also find several case studies across the world really to show that there can also be negative interactions on different SDG targets of SDG 5. So things like women's unpaid work going up, their leisure time reducing because of having to now also farm once they are in the city. So I think it's important to understand that while we have these well-intended measures that on the face of it, they can have, they are supposed to have positive outcomes, they can have mixed outcomes within a household. Another example that we found has a lot of evidences around early warning systems to reduce, climate impacts. And often these are done through public messaging, either through SMSs on your mobile phones or radio messaging. And these also, just because of gendered norms around who owns a phone and who owns a radio, they tend to go to the men in the household rather than the women. So there are these mixed outcomes really of some of the strategies we choose to employ. So what we really end with, I mean, in that work, what we said is that the way forward is, first of all, of course, having mechanisms to monitor these over the long term, just outcomes of interventions we put into place, and also being really careful about this risk of replicating and reinforcing gender inequalities, which then lead to unequal outcomes when we are putting in some of these solutions, even when it's nature-based solutions, which are often considered more equitable and which tend to sometimes have women in the center, they can also lead to inequities.
Brilliant, Chandni. That's really interesting. I mean, I didn't read all sort of 3,000 pages of the report, but I did do a search of gender and climate change, and I sort of came across some of the issues that you mentioned. So that's a really nice summary of the evidence reviewed in the report. Are there any sort of key lessons that you would want to highlight on gender and cities in particular from the report?
Yeah, so the way, as you said, it's 3,600 and a little more pages. So as expected, it's difficult to go through all of that evidence and really take out for a reader. I feel it's difficult. And one of the places I would like to point listeners to is this cross-chapter box on gender, which is there in chapter 18. It's right at the end of the report, where we synthesize all the evidence on gender, whether in cities or in rural areas and different landscapes, really, to just synthesize the evidence on gender and in the whole report. So, of course, while that box is on gender, it also touches upon other social inequities. We use an intersectionality lens to talk about how gender intersects with race, ethnicity, age, income, and a range of other demographic characteristics, of course. And what this box, I think, does differently from the earlier IPCC reports is, again, we try to move away from a focus of only thinking of women as vulnerable and really trying to start looking at women as agents of change, exactly as you said in your opening framing bit. So I think that shift is there, and why that shift is there is not because people don't recognize it, but it's because the IPCC uses existing research and synthesizes it. So there is enough evidence now to show that women actually are leading adaptation action, for example. So there's enough evidence to show that, and we were able to bring it into the IPCC report this time. What we do say with a lot of confidence is that currently we see, especially in urban areas, women are typically underrepresented in decision making, in particular kinds of sectors, especially when it comes to built infrastructure, urban planning, and that's at a city level. But also then if you look at a household or community level, just household decisions around what kind of construction material to use, where to live in the city if you're a migrant. So those kinds of decisions are still not often led by women in typical male-headed households. And that means that then women don't have a lot of control over, where they live, and that dictates their access to resources, their social networks, and all of that. So there is a gap there, I think. And again, we assess this through the SDG 5 targets. But what I want to highlight is that we end that box again on a possibly positive note, where we say that we need to start, if we are to move towards a gender transformative agenda, which is beyond just a gender targeted agenda. So a targeted agenda would have special policies for women. But a transformative agenda, we say, is really this idea, what Mayor Saki so well said, that thinking about men and women as part of the solution, and really thinking of that relational aspect of gender. So we say that if you want to move to a gender transformation agenda, you really need to think about existing social norms and structures and inequality and power structures that are shaping this kind of differential vulnerability. And that is really, it's while we talk of it in the space of climate change adaptation, it is a broader societal transition we're talking of, a transformation of how we imagine societies. So, and it's really a question of social justice, I think. While we looked for examples of this kind of gender transformative change when we wanted to showcase some concrete examples rather than just having just a conceptual end to it, but we actually struggle to do that. And that is where I think is really the next steps of how do we really undertake gender transformative urban planning, for example, gender transformative urban green infrastructure. How do we do that? And what we saw in national and subnational climate policies that we assessed, I remember examples from Ethiopia and India at least, that while now there is a lot of push to mainstream gender in our climate policies, uh, that still tends to frame women as vulnerable, women as victims of climatic risks. And unfortunately, we've gone the other way where we're focusing so much on women that we've left men out of the conversation, which I think is an um, equally big mistake, because we know that to change gender relations and social norms, we have to have both genders, multiple genders, really. So I think in the end, again, this box ends on a note of the need to move away from binaries of either women or men. So we have to collectively think of relational ideas around gender. Of course, we need to adopt an intersectional approach to what we are doing, especially on the solutions we are proposing, and then really get better at our monitoring and evaluation systems that track longer term social and normative change rather than just replicating current norms that are so unequal. Yeah, I'll end there. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much again. I'm really just fascinated by the stuff that you're saying, especially again I've gone through some sections of the IPCC report, and there is evidence that trying to, well, we know this from elsewhere, but trying to change norms around gender need to involve men as well as women, and I think that's something that's coming across from what you're saying, and from what Mayor Saki was saying earlier as well. I think it's also, I mean, just maybe for the audience as well, I think what you've just said really highlights the sort of reverse sort of causality that's going on between these different SDG targets, right? SDG 5, gender equality, not just contributes to sort of climate compatible outcomes for climate action, SDG 13, but climate action can also contribute to gender equality, and that's an important distinction to make. I guess what we still need to figure out is how these relationships work with respect to SDG 11, sustainable cities, and whether there are similar sort of reverse causalities. Is it about a smart city that can create gender equality, or can gender equality contribute to a smart zero carbon city as well, and the positive sort of climate outcomes that come with that? But let's save that for the discussion. I'd next like to turn to Sarah Nandudu, who will tackle this agenda from the perspective of informal settlements dwellers. Now, just to flag, we've had a couple of technical issues, so I'm not sure whether Sarah's camera is going to work, and there might be a slight delay, so please just bear with us. But Sarah, if you can hear me, can you tell us a bit more about what you would like to see city governments do in terms of supporting women-led organizations or federations of slum dwellers in the face of climate breakdown? It's clear women must be central to the screening process, but how can cities facilitate this?
Okay, thank you very much. I've been listening to the first presenters, and I think my conversation on this is just fitting in what they have just said. As the informal dwellers or women in slum population under the umbrella of Slum Dwellers International, our agenda is looking at inclusiveness, and it's all about how do we ensure that everyone is included in the development of the city. It may not only be the city, but in the development of the entire country. And one important thing that people miss out is that there is enough effort, there is enough experience, there is enough energy, there's a lot of energy that you can find in informal dwellers that can help build their own city. But oftentimes, people do not think that there is something valuable that can come out of cities, and more so in informal settlements. As under the umbrella of Slum Dwellers International, our organization brings together people who stay in slums, and the agenda behind it is how do we build the strength amongst the people who stay in slums to improve their livelihood, transform their lives, transform their livelihood and their living environment. And this alone brings together the discussion of working as a team, as city dwellers, to realize the importance of having a life which is good, accessible to income, good social services. But many instances, you realize that informal dwellers are left out in certain instances where there is development. So what we would love to see cities do is to support women initiatives, to pick them from where they are to another level. One, women are struggling to fit in government institutions. It's evident that when you talk of informality, people will distance from you. But it's high time that people, governments, realize the strength that people in informal settlements have via their saving groups, via the mobilization into meaningful engagement with different partners, and build on that effort that they have to help them transform even where they stay. Because many times we have seen informal dwellers or slum dwellers being evicted. This means you're depriving them the right to be in the city. And this is because they can't access security of tenure. We would love to see cities work together with informal dwellers or slum dwellers in form of accessing land as a key value in development of lives as well as cities. So we do feel that cities should have a round table talk with the city dwellers to agree on how they can develop their cities together, and see that we have integrated planning, which does not discriminate the poor, does not discriminate the people who are marginalized, like disabled, the youth, but an integrated, inclusive approach for us to realize the value of socio-economic transformation, to realize that people can live a meaningful life even when their beginning was not at a good, I would say not well stated, because many times when you reach in an informal settlement in a slum, people would not even want to pass there because of the living conditions there. But if we have integrated planning and we plan together, make sure that we integrate what the poor want and what the rich want, then we shall have an inclusive city where everyone lives. So we also want to see that cities partner with communities. Partnership is very key, because even when we stay in cities as informal dwellers, we need resources in our informal settlements. We need social services. We need to work together with the cities to say we need water, we need electricity, we need street lights for protection of our women and children. We need security for the children in the cities and women. We need protection to each and everyone who stay in the city. So without partnership, it will be very difficult, because many times cities look at these people as wrongdoers, look at informal dwellers as wrongdoers. But once we partner together, engage in one another in forums, government forums with people, sit together, find out issues, discuss them, and create solutions together, this alone will create an impact in having a city which is livable, which is good for all the poor and the rich, and which is a city for everyone. So besides that, we would want to see cities work with informal dwellers in economic factors, because many times we are seeing cities chasing away people from streets. Can we work with the cities? They demarcate areas where these people can put their livelihoods, have their markets, maybe special days, and they're able to have a living, because we all come to cities with a reason. We all come to cities, we want to go to schools. We come to cities, we want our children to have good education. So the moment you keep tossing people up and down, the reason you will see cities which are unsafe. So we need to work together to have conducive environment, that people have where to get a living for that day, have where to get money to take their children to school, have access to health care, which is good, because that is the reason they come to cities. If they are repulsed, that means you are depriving them of the right to a living which is decent. So we also want cities to realize that livelihood is key factor, and then social economic transformation is the key to making people stay in cities. And then maybe lastly, I would wind up on this, is that we want to see cities recognize the role of women in all the developments, more so in climate change, adaptations, climate change, resilience, where we have seen women come up even to do things that are helping cities not to realize some of these effects. Because I'll give an example of my own city in Kampala, where women have come up in groups, they clean the settlements, the waste that should have been thrown away is turned into wealth. They are making briquettes out of waste. They are making recycling machines, and now they are recycling waste which is supposed to be thrown away, which is damaging our drainage channels, which is causing flooding. Women are turning it into wealth. So why not partner with such people to support you, have a clean city while they get some money out of it, and then as well as cleaning their own area where they live. I think it's good that we partner with them and realize the beauty about having people grouped, and the power that they have within them that can help cities, moreover, to transform in livelihood of the people who stay in those cities. Yeah, for now, I think I can stop there, and maybe if there will be any other questions, I'll be able to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really good to hear such powerful words about the importance of including um, slum dwellers and informal women who live in informal settlements into decision-making processes that would help shape a smart city. I'd like to actually take this discussion back to our first speaker and ask Mayor Saki if you can speak about any of the participatory processes that are available for women in Accra.
For women in Accra, yes, they mostly traders and then workers as well. But looking at the way things go, we usually have stakeholders engagement with them. And then with this stakeholders engagement, they will usually tell you some of their successes they've chopped, and then also the lapses, that's challenges that they do have. And you could see from their narration that most of the challenges that we do see as to listening to their needs, and this helps us to plan. It helps us to plan when you look at the challenges, and that's their needs. It helps us to plan our policies as to how to handle, how to go about it, and how to generate support for them, and also how to counsel and advise how to build themselves up boldly and stand any challenges that come their way. We also try as much as possible to put most of them by having training sessions that will build their capacity of whatever they are into, as to if it's trading, or business, let's assume, for instance, business, how to go about their finances, and how to handle their monies, and how to cater for expenditure. And then I think that currently we are looking at getting access to funds for them, because they're trying to manage and go about their daily work. They also have this huge challenge of how to finance or build up their businesses. And because they are most of them are in petty trading, we need to assist them and then also train them. They surely need access to funding. So we'll have access to fund in the greening jobs, like we asking them to collect the waste and also doing other excess work, trying to train them. We need to support them by raising funds so that they can also support their homes, their children, the family, and then see how best they can go about the greening processes that we are engaging them into. And so usually we'll be trying to get them on board to understand, get a deep understanding of what we've given to them to do. We also challenge them to take up greening jobs that makes them occupied. It occupies them and then helps them to do more than they're being expected to do. So this and so many other things we are trying to push and to put in place that will enhance and encourage and make them focus to the greening jobs that they are doing, they are taking up.
Thank you, Miyazaki. That's it's whatever is you're doing is clearly working, because as Sarah also mentioned in the beginning, one of the important things is women's political participation, and you are testament to that as a female mayor of one of Africa's most important and largest cities. There is clearly political representation of women in Ghana, and that's something that we should try and replicate elsewhere. I would also like to ask Chandni about how participatory processes and collectives work in the Indian context, and how they can contribute towards greening a city. Chandni.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think just listening to Sarah speak earlier about women's collectives and bringing the necessity to bring women into the conversation and really, enable participatory processes that allow women to also come to the table, made me reflect on India's history of having self-help groups. So bringing women together and building capacity. And that's mainly happened in rural areas, but now we see a lot of evidence of that in urban areas as well, where women collectives are formed, and then they are, for a range of activities, whether it is a development intervention, but also then having some sustainability co-benefit. And one of the examples that come to mind is I've been leading a project on urban agriculture in India and Tanzania, where we are really trying to look at how farming in cities can meet both sustainability challenges, food insecurity and nutritional challenges, but also then thinking about growing within the city so that we can reduce emissions from related to food, so food miles, and also thinking about how wet waste goes to landfills and that causes emissions as well. So what we have seen, at least in the city of Pune in West India, is that most of the waste pickers and the waste collectors are women. And several NGOs have been training women to start thinking about wet waste composting, using that wet waste then to grow vegetables. So that helps in, household nutritional security, as well as gets you a bit of money. So I think there are these examples of how women can be at the forefront of these kinds of solutions. And why it's particularly gendered is, first of all, the act of waste picking in, at least in the city of Pune, and wet waste in particular, is women are the ones who are doing it mostly. And then also the other side of providing food in a household is also typically a woman's job. So there is that link that's made. I just wanted to also add that while there is a role for formal collectives like these self-help groups that might get a bit of capacity building, a bit of training at the beginning, and maybe even some money to do these things, I feel that there's also there's a need for us to recognize informal collectives, which is just people coming together and doing things that drive them. And perhaps in that case, we need to leave them and let that organic, informal, collective formation also happen. I often wonder that again, from that example of urban agriculture, I've spoken to so many amazing low income and middle income women farmers who take tremendous joy from growing their own food and feeding their families. And they have these informal peer networks. What does it mean to formalize that system? Right now they have their own ways of sharing information, sharing seeds, sharing traditional varieties of seeds. And just the act of formalization of that might really change that dynamic. So we need to be careful when we think about collectives and creating structures. Sometimes not having a structure and this more informal kind of knowledge sharing also helps. And it's a more inclusive space because the community comes up on its own rather than us going and creating it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chandni. We're slowly starting to get through some questions from the audience, but I'd really like to encourage you all to submit any questions that you have so that we can enter that sort of dynamic stage of the discussion. We've got one question here which really speaks to the energy that we need to address the issue of gendering green cities, and that Sarah mentioned in her part. But Sarah, if I could ask you, what commitments would you or SDI like to see from the next COP, the COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh, which is obviously the Africa COP? What commitments would you like to see on cities or gender going forward?
I just feel that commitments should be maybe cross-cutting. I don't know if that is the right statement, but I'd love to see cities commit. I would love to see national governments make commitments. I would love to see international world makes commitments, because in all we speak about issues of climate change, there is resources required. We need knowledge, we need sharing. So in all this, we would love to see cities commit to work with its indigenous people, the people who stay in their cities, to work together towards the betterment of their cities, the environment, and effects of climate issues. They should move together. There should be no one left behind. And I want to see national governments make pro-people policies as regards to issues of climate change. So I want to see governments commit themselves to work with people, to work with different categories of people, regardless of their sex, regardless of what. Work with women, work with the youth, work with the children, work with disabled people. Together we can make it. And I want also to see international world commit to work with communities, because many instances we are left out. People are looking at working with governments, but we have this particular component of people who are very resourceful, but they lack support. And you only see that some information, some resources are moved down to government and stop at government level. But we have entities like mobilized communities, we have CSOs, we have non-government organizations that are doing tremendous work, but there is no support. So we want to see people commit to work together with whoever has something to put on table to transform their cities, to transform their environment, as well as the cities in general. Those are some of the commitments I would love to see at that conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Mayor Saki, if I could ask you the same question, if we were having this same panel at COP27 in half a year's time, what would you be asking people? What would you be asking global leaders to do to help gender cities in Africa and beyond? Sorry, Mayor Saki, you might be on mute. Still on mute, I'm afraid. Oh, there we go.
That's good. For the past 2 years, have shown that now, more than ever, we need to find ways of forging global corporations to find solutions to global challenges such as climate change. And I also think that working in partnership with other cities, there is an opportunity to find common and sustainable solutions. Then I also think that I'm proud to be part of the African European Mayors Dialogue, an innovative platform for cities to work together across Africa and Europe to advance cooperation between cities within and between our continents. That's also another one. And then I think cities play a key role in the green transition to address and resolve global challenges together. It is vital that the voices cities be heard at a national and international levels. Then I think also with the last thought, it says it's the, through though cooperative or cooperation, though cooperation, we can exchange ideas to better development or to develop, test, and scale innovative dialogues. So it means we can be creating that dialogues amongst ourselves to at least create innovation solution to tackle common issues faced in building green, resilient, and inclusive cities. And I think with those words, I'm so grateful. I think that's another main point in joining the Mayor's Dialogue platform. So when we have come to that level, I'm sure things should work. So it should be more action oriented than commitment, more of action. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mayor Saki. And for anybody who's not aware of the Africa-Europe Mayors Dialogue, it's a really interesting project and really encourages cities in the Global South and the Global North to act in coalition and share lessons and ideas like the ones that Mayor Saki has mentioned. Finally, Chandni, if I could just ask you the same question about COP27, what would you like to see in terms of the commitments made on cities or gender at COP27?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. I think one of the things I would definitely like to see, and I think this is going to be the big agenda on this COP, is around loss and damage. And the focus tends to be on material loss and damage. So impacts that we can actually quantify and measure. But from my own work, what we've seen, and also loss and damage from rapid events, so floods and cyclones. But at least in India, we have a lot of slow onset events like drought and water scarcity, which aren't as visible in our cities. And while, of course, we do have flooding, drought, and water scarcity are also significant risks in our cities, and often they are affecting low-lying areas. Water is critically linked to women and the time they spend around collecting water in our cities. So I feel that some of these slow onset events, but also non-material losses and damages, things like increased conflict, having to spend more time, for example, those kinds of things which affect women much more than men, I feel, in our informal settlements in cities. I would like to see some recognition of that, first of all, and then actually a way forward. And one more point, I think we do talk a lot about capacity building flowing from the global north to the global south. But I think there needs to be greater conversation about capacity building and knowledge sharing within the global south. I think there's a lot that, for example, African cities can teach Indian cities and vice versa. So I feel that that conversation within the global south, where contexts are more similar and experiences of inequality and colonization are more real, and but seeing that at a global scale, really, at a COP would be really nice. And then having money put behind those south to south capacity building, rather than always capacity seen to be flowing from the north to the south. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much for those final words, Chandni. I think that's it for now. We're rapidly running out of time, and it's nearly the end of the webinar. I'd like to finish by just thanking you for all your questions on how to gender the green city. I wish we could have had a bit more time to bring everyone who wanted to contribute in, but we'll keep the conversation going online. For now, I'd like to share a final thank you to our amazing panelists, Maya, Saki, Chandni, and Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak at this event. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure the audience does too. This public event has been recorded and will be available online on www.odi.org in the next couple of days. We'll also tweet from @ODI_global when it's available on YouTube and as an ODI live event podcast. So please do share and keep the conversation going far and wide. And we look forward to seeing you at another ODI event soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.